What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Alpha Girl Confidence Podcast. This is episode 257, where I sat down with Finding Elevation author Lisa Thompson. So, this is one of my all time favorite books. I'm fascinated with mountaineering, anything that has to do with K2 or Everest. K2 is the most dangerous mountain in the world. Lisa was the second American woman ever to summit K2. She summited Everest. She summited the seven summits, which is the highest mountains in each of the seven continents. So she is such an incredible athlete, incredible person. She has her own company called Alpine Athletics, where she helps other people on their expeditions to prepare for their expeditions. In this conversation, we talked about her experiences on the mountain, how she prepares mentally, physically. We talked about how she navigates the fear and the doubt that comes up when she's on the mountain, and how also she's translated that to her life, and just so many amazing things about her experience. So this is by far one of my favorite conversations that I think no matter who you are, an athlete, a parent of an athlete, just someone listening, you're going to get so much out of this conversation. I could have talked to her easily for another hour. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Make sure you check out her book, Finding Elevation, in the show notes. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Lisa Thompson. Hey, Lisa, what's up? Welcome to the Alpha Girl Confidence Podcast. Super excited to have one of my favorite authors on the show. So thanks for coming on.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to talk to you too.
Yeah, I told you I read the book like a year ago. And when I read the book, I never thought like, oh, I'm going to have her on my podcast one day. But then like later on, I was like, oh, wouldn't that be cool? And then I never reached out. And then finally I was like, you know what? Just reach out. Like the worst that can happen is she ignores you. So when I got a response, I was like, oh my gosh, like I get to talk to her, which I'm just like so fascinated. We were talking about this with the past guests, how we were both fascinated with like anything that has to do with like Everest and K2. And I don't think I would ever want to do that, but it's just so fascinating. So I'm really looking forward to it.
It's interesting to me too that people find it fascinating and don't want to do it. Like I'm super interested in like that psyche because I see mountains and I'm like, I want to just go climb them all. I don't understand why you would not want to do that.
I think it's just so like mysterious, and like the people that do it, I think intrigue me because I think it requires so much mental and physical fortitude and preparation, which I definitely want to get into. But I don't know. I think that's one of the things, especially when women do it, like that really fascinates me.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's
I'm
so
excited to get into all of that, and maybe I'll spark your interest to do a little bit of mountaineering.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe if you can coach me up, we'll see. But yeah, I want to kind of start with your kind of journey because you have an interesting one, and that it's not very linear. Like it's like how did you end up here? Kind of is the big thing, and I think it's cool for girls that are listening to be like, oh my gosh, like here's what's possible for me. Not that everyone's going to want to do that, but just your story. So wherever you want to start from, but like how did you get to where you are?
Yeah, you're right. It was not a very linear path. Lots of stops and starts and circles sometimes, big mountains to ascend for sure. And when I look back, I can connect the dots and it seems logical to me now in hindsight. But I definitely didn't think when I was a little girl that I would be doing anything athletic ever in my life. So I grew up in Illinois, one of the flattest states in the US, where the highest point is 1,235 feet. And it's like prominent. It's not that
You're
it's
like the mountain. Like, let's go climb.
Right. It's a place. And I wasn't like I grew up in a little farm town, so I did play sports, not very well and not at a high level, like only because, they just needed so many people to be on the team, right? So anyone who raised their hand normally got to play. But not athletic, very clumsy. And I didn't have role models to show me what could be possible, or even to tell me that anything was possible, that whatever I wanted to do, I could set my heart to and work hard and accomplish it. I just didn't have those people around me when I was a little girl. And, sometimes I am sad about that because I think, gosh, if I could all the other things I could have accomplished or could have accomplished sooner if I had that. But I'm still very happy and grateful for where I ended up. And, I like to say that spite is what got me into mountaineering because I'm one of those people, less so now, but definitely when I was younger, that if you wanted me to do something, just tell me I can't do it. And
Hmm.
that will give me the motivation and sometimes the anger to prove you wrong. And that's definitely how I got started in mountaineering, because the guys at my office would go climbing and they never asked me to go with them. And it's not that they were intentionally trying to exclude me. I think they just didn't think I would want to go.
Right.
And it wasn't that I thought climbing sounded fun back then. It was that I saw it as a way to be included in their group at the office. And so I thought if I could go climbing with them on the weekends, maybe then they would see me as capable, or maybe then I would like not get the worst project at work.
Yeah.
And that never worked out, FYI.
Hmm.
But I just decided I would go climbing by myself, and I had no clue. And back then, climbing was like hiking because I came from the Midwest. So I thought any mountain was like a hardcore climb.
Yeah.
And I just gradually I liked a couple of things about it. I liked pushing myself physically and mentally. And I liked this indelible sense of accomplishment that you get when you set your mind to something and you achieve it. I liked that nobody could take that away from me. And in the beginning, I definitely climbed to prove people wrong and to prove what I was capable of.
Hmm.
And that can only get you so far, I think. But I began to learn a lot about myself through the mountains and what I can accomplish and how that can inspire other people. And that's when things really shifted for me. And I started to climb, not just to prove people wrong, but actually to grow from that experience. So
That's,
the short
yeah.
answer is I started climbing to prove people wrong, and then thankfully was aware enough to realize that the mountains were giving me so much more than that, and there was so much more to learn out there.
Yeah, and I also think that's one of the things that fascinates me is just that when you hear stories of people climbing, it really is this spiritual transformation.
Yeah.
It just there's this crazy transformation, and it's like I think that's another thing. But when you said that you started out of spite, right? But then you shifted to like wanting to do it for all those reasons you listed. Like what mountain, what experience, like
Yeah.
when did that shift happen for you, right? So 2008 was your first summit attempt of Rainier.
Hmm.
2009 was your second you actually summited Rainier. So
Right.
did it happen during that time or did it happen
Oh
after
no.
that?
I'm much more hard-headed than that. I'm one
I
of those
didn't, yeah, you're
people.
like, I need time.
Like, I think the universe is always like giving us these little clues or like
Yeah.
signs, like this is where you should focus. Or and I spent a lot of my life just ignoring all of those, just like very like blinders on. I'm doing this, and no matter how hard it is, I'm gonna just muscle my way through it. And I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2015, and that threatened to take away climbing, which at that
Right.
point had become a part of who I was. And it
Hmm.
still was this outlet to prove myself. And that made it, I think, even harder for it to be taken away from me. And so it was through that experience of fighting cancer and really understanding how important climbing was to me and being in the mountains was to me and how much I could learn from the mountains that made me shift from just realizing that, I was out there to prove something to actually there's a lot to learn and a lot of growth that can happen in the mountains. And that's what started for me a couple of things. It started to it made me realize that I want to spend my life somehow related to the mountains. Like I want that to be my career. I want that to be how I spend all of my time. And that mountains, as you said, are these incredible transformational, often spiritual places that can teach us a lot about ourselves and about how we relate to other people. And that's when things really started to shift for me.
Mm. Love that. So when I was going back through, like we're gonna bounce around a little bit here.
Yeah, please.
But when I was going through the book, I think it was like the first page, like in the introduction, like you talked about K2, which also, let me say, listeners, the book is so cool because the first thing I noticed was each chapter has like the picture of the mountains and like what the elevation is of those and like the outline. And so when I was going back through it, actually was really helpful because I'm like, okay, here's Everest. I know this happened at Everest. I'm going to flip to that page.
Oh,
So little
cool.
side note, but I love that. But yeah, on the first page you were talking about K2. And so K2, for those of you listening, is 28,251 feet tall.
Yes.
Second to Everest, but a lot more challenging than Everest. And I will get into like why that is. But you were like moving at a snail's pace at one point, right? I think you wrote, I'm looking at my notes, 4 inches in 10 minutes. And you
Yeah.
notice some of that doubt start to come in. So when I read that, I immediately go panic. Like, oh my gosh, I would have freaked out. And maybe I wouldn't have when I was in, but thinking about that makes me panic. Like, how did you not let that doubt or panic like overwhelm you and like keep going? Like, that's a big
Yeah.
question, but I'd love to hear.
So it's funny how this was one time when I probably did listen to those universal signs that were being thrown at me because on that moment, so I'm at 25,000 feet. It's one of the most challenging parts of that route on K2 where the terrain is near vertical rock. And the day that we climbed it, there was a thin layer of ice over the top of it as well, which makes it even more dangerous to climb. And there are ropes in place that we were ascending, but it was still a very difficult section of the route. And I remember thinking, like, why am I here? Why am I doing this? I could be at home going for a run with my dog, spending the night with friends. Like, why am I here risking my life, putting myself in this dangerous position where everything is hard? And I started to fantasize about, I mean, I don't have to be here. It's my choice to be here. No one's going to stop me if I want to turn around. And I started to play that out in my brain like, okay, I could descend and I could, be back at base camp at this point, and then I could, start walking back to the lowest village and get I just started like playing it all
Planning
out.
your escape a little bit.
Exactly, planning my
Yeah.
escape. And I just heard this thought in my brain, which is like, well, is this it then? Like, this is all then that you are capable of? If you choose to turn around here, that's what you're saying. And that just really like clicked things into perspective for me and made me realize that this is not all that I'm capable of. It was just that I was frustrated and scared and tired and cold and all of those things. And that just created for me this doubt in my mind about what I could do. And I think that happens to all of us. I mean, it still happens to me when I climb, not in as extreme of a situation,
Mm-hmm.
but that little voice of doubt is very quick to jump into your mind and then to just start to grow and grow and grow until you believe that it's true. And that moment was thankfully one of the first times that I started to realize that I don't have to give that voice the stage,
Yeah.
that it doesn't have to drive the bus, that it's important to recognize that voice because often, it's trying to keep you safe, or it's trying to, in the mountains at least, it's trying to prevent you from a dangerous situation. But that doesn't mean that I have to make my decisions from that place. And so being able to have a conversation with that voice, thank it for keeping me safe, and then telling it that I'm going to make a different decision today, or I got this, whatever it is, has really helped me to keep things in perspective and to, I think, push through uncomfortable situations or situations where I'm out of my comfort zone, and to really focus on what's important to me and not the difficulty or the pain of the moment.
I love that you just kind of walked us through kind of your process for dealing with that, because it's not that only when you're climbing mountains does doubt come up or like, right? Like that can happen any moment. And
Anytime.
using what you just talked about with, acknowledging it and, listening to it, because doubt is there to keep us safe, right?
Yep.
It's our mind's way of being
Yep.
like, hey, like, are you sure you want to do this?
Yep.
It's like, whether it be to save us from dying, to save us from embarrassment, to
Yep.
save us from failure.
Yep.
And so it's important to recognize that it's not always true. And you get to decide, like, hey, am I going to listen to this and let it affect my behavior? Or am I
Yep.
going to choose something different? And that's
Yes.
something that you use on the mountain, or you use in the boardroom, or you use on the field or the court. Like, so I want everyone listening, like, bookmark that part for, anytime you're experiencing doubt. Because if you can do it on a
Yep.
mountain, like, anybody can do that.
Yep. And I also think that I coach people now, you coach people
Hmm.
as well. Like I see people, and I do this myself. We just create these elaborate stories
Yeah.
about why we can't do something or why something is too hard. And when I really stop and slow down and think through it and separate facts from reality, what I find probably 99 or 98% of the time is that I've just made up this big fictitious story in my brain about why something is too hard. And I will often also say, like, I will look for evidence that proves that I'm capable of doing something.
Exactly.
Like if I'm
Yeah.
climbing and I start to hear this voice and this story of like, this is too hard, or this is too steep, or I'm moving too slow, or my backpack's too heavy. Like, hang on, I actually am doing it. Like I'm
Right.
doing it right now. And those kind of realizations and separating facts from story have been hugely helpful for me in the mountains.
Yeah. And speaking of kind of, mindset strategies, I guess, like, what role does, if any, and I know you talk about it a little bit in your book, but does, like, mantras or affirmations play, like, when you're climbing?
Yeah, huge for me, huge for a number of reasons. So what I will often do if I'm climbing something big and scary, and I think this is true even if you're taking on a big project or you're, doing something you haven't done for the first time, is I'll think about all the things that scare me about that situation. And I'll sometimes even write them down. And then I will work on mantras to help me get through those situations, those scary situations, if they actually happen in the real world.
Yeah.
And so they're important for me because they just then become a tool. And if I'm like worried that something's going to be, too exposed and I'm going to be freaked out about potentially falling, if that actually happens, I just have this tool. I just have this
Mm.
mantra ready to go, and I start repeating it in my brain. And the point is that then all that negativity doesn't have a space to
Right.
occupy in my brain because I'm thinking about
The
and
positive. Yeah.
repeating this thing that's really positive and supportive of me.
Like, one of yours, I think, was one of yours that you talked about. I can't remember which mountain was it. Like, every step, it was like, you are, and then strong. Was that one of them?
Yeah, you have a good
Okay.
memory, Shay. Yeah, I would say on K2, I would say, and I would pair it with my movements. I would like move
Yeah.
my right foot and say I am, and my left foot and say strong. And I just kept saying it over and over and over again. And yeah, I will also sometimes say inner peace, like just calm, just like calm, like stop getting all worked up, just
Hmm.
stay calm.
Yeah.
um, I also use my name a lot. Like I will say, Lisa, you've got this.
Yeah.
So it really makes it personal. Um, yeah, I'm a huge fan of mantras. They've
I
saved me
mean,
on many
yeah, they're
occasions.
and they're so simple too. Like, I like how you, for each kind of situation, maybe you've created, one depending on, what you're going through. And I think a lot of times people think that oh, that's not going to work, or it's too simple. But I mean, like I said, like, if you're using that on the most dangerous mountain in the world and it's helping you, like, it's going to help a 13-year-old
Yes,
athlete before she shoots a free throw. You know what I
totally,
mean?
absolutely. And I also think, first of all, I love things that are simple and highly effective. I just
Yes.
feel like I'm hacking my life when that happens. And someone told me once, I think this is true, you get to have one thought in your brain at a time. And so why wouldn't you make it like
Yeah.
why would you choose to make that thought something that's negative or that's not supporting you? Why not make it the most positive, uplifting thought that it could be?
Yeah, I love that. Speaking of thoughts, it kind of segues into this. Like, I'm really fascinated by the physical and the mental preparation it takes to climb any mountain, but especially Everest. So let me make sure I got okay, how do you say, is it Manaslu?
Yeah, Manaslu or Monaslu, either.
Okay, that's the one I have a hard time pronouncing, but you attempted that
Right.
5 months post-op from your double mastectomy, correct?
Yes.
Which
Yes.
is absolutely insane.
Yeah.
So that in 15, Everest in 16, K2 in 18.
Yes. That's right.
How did you prepare for those mentally, physically? Or did you prepare differently for each one? Kind of talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think that every mountain I think is different. Those
Yeah.
peaks are all similar in that they're long, multi-month expeditions. So the preparation is not hugely dissimilar. But I, so I was preparing to climb Monaslu at the beginning of 2015, and I was, getting my training plan together and getting to know my team and just super stoked because that was the first time that I was going to be climbing in the Himalaya, which, as listeners probably know, is a huge mountain range in Asia, and most of the highest mountains in the world are there. And it felt really monumental to me that I was ready to climb one of them. So I'm getting ready, and I have a routine mammogram before work one morning, and I learn, not in that moment, I didn't learn that I had breast cancer, but I felt adamantly that I had it after that appointment. And then of course it was confirmed later. So then I, go into this series of operations and what ifs and day after day doctor's appointments and surgeries. And I remember saying to my oncology surgeon, and she and I are friends now, and we laugh about this, but I was like, so I'm going to climb this mountain in August. And this is in like April that I'm saying this to her, like probably March. And like, I need to do that. And I didn't say it as confidently as I'm saying it now. I was like near
Yeah.
tears the whole time. Um, and I remember her, like, she just has this way of being very direct and compassionate all at the same time, and saying what is so important about that mountain that you can't climb it later. And what I couldn't say to her, because I didn't want to cry, was that I needed to climb in order to prove that I'm still strong, in order to prove that I still can do these things that have become a part of my personality and who I am. And so I was preparing to climb, like getting all fit and in shape, and then had a series of surgeries that took probably 3 months. And when I went to Nepal to climb Manaslu, I really wasn't sure if I was ready. Like, I didn't know what my body was capable of. I had never climbed that high before. And our team made a very difficult decision to turn around at 23,000 feet because of avalanches. And in truth, I was happy with that decision because I just was afraid of pushing my body farther and further.
Mm-hmm.
So then I came back and I decided, why wouldn't I want to climb Mount Everest? I've just been through this, harrowing experience with cancer. Why wouldn't I want to push myself as hard as I can? And so then I really got into training, which physically what that looks like is a lot of running, a lot of climbing, a lot of hiking with a heavy backpack. If people are familiar, a lot of zone 2 cardio where you're,
Mm-hmm.
moderate intensity, high volume cardio, and then training and building strength specific for that particular mountain. And it feels like, and all athletes probably feel like this, like it's a part-time job.
Oh
Like, I
yeah,
would
have to
spend
be.
15 to 20 hours a week
Yeah.
climbing and working out and running and getting ready for whatever the mountain was.
And did you use, like, as far as mental preparation goes, did you visualize routes? Did you use visualization or anything like that in your preparation?
Yeah. So for Everest, because I was like, kind of felt like I was out of my league. At that point, I was working with a coach, but I wanted to have every possible resource available to me to be safe and successful on that mountain. And so I started working with a performance coach then. Her name is Dr. Tori Higgins. She's phenomenal. And she gave me a lot of important tools that I still use today. And visualization is one of them. And I will even, I visualize like everything, like my business
Yeah.
growing. Like I spend a lot
Right.
of time
Yeah, same. Hmm.
because I think it's like we were going back to like you can have one thought in your brain at a time. And why wouldn't you make it the most positive one? And so for climbs, I will kind of going back to what I call the fear list, like the things that worry me. I will then create a visualization of like, say there's a really difficult part of a route that I'm afraid of climbing or it has a lot of
Hmm.
consequence. I will visualize myself climbing efficiently through that part of the route and do that. You don't have to do it for very long, but like 5 minutes, 5 times a week.
Yeah.
And I think it just creates this I think the science shows it creates this very positive mental picture of you doing something that you didn't think you could do.
Yeah. And also like the feelings of accomplishing that thing and,
Yes.
the building the confidence that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
huge. Do you visualize
Um,
too?
I do. Yeah. I'll visualize, like you said, business growing or living on the beach, which is a dream of mine, just
Yes.
everyday stuff like that.
Totally.
I even like tell girls or sometimes, if you're afraid of doing something like going to the dentist or which I hate going to the dentist or going on an airplane, like
Yep.
that's something I use is like visualizing myself feeling calm and feeling, just at peace and stuff like that. So I use it for like the big like dreams and goals, but also just for anything that kind of scares me.
Yeah, me too. I think it's a really good way to sort of trick our brains into
Yeah,
believing that something isn't as scary. And again,
right.
this doesn't apply if like your life is at risk, right? But like
Yeah.
when it's things that you can get over, you can get through, you can accept, I think visualization's a really important tool to get through them.
Yeah, and I think again this was early on in the book where let's see if I have it in my notes, but I don't remember what mountain you were climbing, but you were talking about how before that you kind of tried to control a lot. And then at one point you decided in order for you to be successful, you have to release control.
Yes.
Do you
I'm
recall what
laughing.
I'm talking
I'm laughing
about?
because you're like, you kind of like to control. I was like, oh no, I
I'm looking to see
like,
if it was in my notes. I'm pretty sure climbing. Oh, it didn't say which one, but yeah,
yeah.
just that climbing forced you to kind of like release control. Like
Yes.
how, like, I guess my question is with that, why was releasing control like so pivotal for you to be successful?
Hmm. So I grew up believing that I needed to control things in order to keep the situation around me safe.
Hmm.
And that, as it does when you're a kid, that just translates into the rest of your life. And it
For sure.
becomes this sort of like survival slash safety mechanism. For me,
Yeah.
it did, where I felt like if I could just control everything, then it's going to be safe and it's going to work out the way that I want it to. And of course, that's not realistic. It's also incredibly exhausting. It's maddening because it's never going to work out that way. And part of I think what attracted me when I like dug down deeper into what attracted me to climbing, I think one of the things was that I couldn't control everything. I couldn't control the weather. I couldn't control the condition of the route. And so it taught me that it was okay to let go of those things and be open to the outcome, but not control the outcome because the summit is never guaranteed. And we all know that going in, that's what we sign up for. It's part of the deal. And I've seen so many people who get so focused on standing on the summit that they forget to just enjoy what's happening around them every day, or worse, they make poor choices on the mountain. And it became really important for me to just let that go and just be in the moment, have goals, know what my boundaries are, use all the tools that I have available to me, but let go of what's going to happen. And
Did you translate that to your normal life as well?
yes, exactly. So then I was like, well, man, if I can do that in a dangerous situation on the highest mountains in the world. Why can't I do that in my relationship or in my business? And so I don't get it right every day for sure, but I at least have this evidence that just letting go of that control is okay.
Yeah. And not only okay, but a lot of times necessary.
Yes. And it's so freeing. And again, I
Yeah.
still screw it up often, but like it is very freeing. Like I remember when I was leaving for K2, was literally getting in my car to go to the airport to fly to Pakistan. And I remember thinking, my goals are to do my best every day and to never climb above my ability.
Mm.
And that's it. And if I do those things, then I'm successful. And whatever happens is going to happen. And that was, and I really believed that. I think there have been times where I told myself, oh, I'm just going to let this go. But then I don't. And in this case, I really held myself to that. And things worked out incredibly well. And I'm grateful for that. And it was a much less stressful situation knowing that I had these very specific and simple goals and I let go of everything else.
Yeah. It probably made the experience more enjoyable for the people you were
Totally.
with too, right?
Yeah, as enjoyable
Yeah.
as it can be, but yes, like you're not
Yeah.
so, and I think it's a fine line because it's easy to be so tied to the goal. And
Hmm.
what I'm saying is the opposite of that is not letting
Mm.
go of the outcome. The opposite is still having an intention and a goal and something you're working towards, but not be so tied to the outcome that you
Mm.
miss all the fun that happens along the way.
Yeah. And with that, that made me think of like, you obviously have to make a lot of life or death decisions on the mountain. How do you make those? Like, like, you've got to go with your gut, your
Yep.
intuition, right? Like, how have you, I guess, honed in the ability to listen to your gut over, let's say, doubt or like fear, or on the
Yes.
opposite side, just this motivation to like get to the top?
Yep. That's a great question. And to me, it's about discernment. And I think that that only comes with time and practice. Maybe for me, at least, maybe there are some people who have this just innate sense of right and wrong or good decision, bad decision. But for me, it
Mm-hmm.
took years of climbing to build up this wisdom and this sense of discernment. And there is a very distinct difference in how those feel to me. So I was climbing, I guess this was this summer, and my friend and I, we were rock climbing. We sort of got off the route, and I was like, okay, let me like shimmy down here and see if there's a way to get back over to where we think we need to be. And I like shimmied down this little slab, and I was like, nope. Like it was a very, it just feels different to me
Yeah.
that like that sense of this is not safe, you need to turn around versus there's just this is like a story that's bubbling up that's not there to keep me safe.
Yeah, like I feel like I have a hard time with that a lot of the time. Like, is this a real like gut intuition or is this just fear speaking? Like, I honestly haven't really gotten good at deciphering between those. So yeah, I was just interested. Do you feel it in like a different part of your body?
I feel it when it's like hard no, I feel it in every part of my body. Like it's
Got it.
just everywhere.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And if it's like uneasy, discomfort, I feel it mostly in my stomach.
Got it.
And
Interesting.
I find like there's the situation on the mountain where you're making decisions sometimes in a second. But if I'm wavering in my personal life, I will literally just meditate and just be
Yeah,
quiet. And
yeah,
often that's when like it just hits
for
you
sure.
like, oh, right, this is where you need to focus.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important, and I truly believe that it's best to make decisions with whatever you want to say, your heart or your gut over your
Yep.
head. And for me, it's a lot of times I can feel the fear. I can feel it coming from like my mind. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
if it's, coming from, me, it's like I can feel like something more so, and it's more of a visceral, like more of a body
Yes.
feeling as opposed to more of like a heady thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I
Yeah.
think it's so important to share that with girls too, because I didn't figure this out until I was like 40. So,
hmm
and
Yeah,
I,
totally. I mean, I have girls like ask me, like I don't know which team to go to, or stuff like that, and I'm like, okay, well, I think it's most important, first of all, like not to just make the decision on pros and cons. Like I used to be a total pros and cons
oh, and
checklist person.
put the line
Draw
in
the
the middle of the page.
line.
Yep.
Yep. I used to totally do that, right? But now I'm like, okay, like, and this is how I make the decision when I have a decision to make. This is how I do it. So I tell the girls, like, find a quiet space. Like if you want to call it meditation, great. If not, that's
Yep.
okay. But
Right.
quiet space and just like feel into it. And sometimes even I'll visualize both scenarios
Mm-hmm.
and see how my body responds to either of those
Yep.
scenarios. And so I think that's a huge way to make any decision, big or small. Just really like sit with yourself, like you said, as opposed to
Yeah.
just like thinking logically about everything.
Yep. Totally. Which is hard
Yeah,
to do. We're
it
taught to be
is.
logical. And I was,
Mm-hmm.
went to engineering school. So a
Yes,
lot of,
right.
a
Very
lot of
logical.
petty things and a lot of logic. And it's taken me a long time to, and I think we need both of those
For
abilities
sure,
in
for sure.
life. And
Mm-hmm.
the key is to know when to apply one versus the other.
Yeah.
Um, I will also often feel through, if I make choice A, how is that going to feel in 6 months or a year? If I make choice
Yeah.
B, how is that going to feel? And I sort of feel the difference between those two things in the
Yeah.
future as my future self. And that helps me also to make decisions.
Yeah. Like not just, well, how am I going to feel tomorrow, but how am I going to
Right.
feel, right? Like it's a
Yeah.
more of a long-term thing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. I feel like this is a selfish question,
Go for it.
but I'm sure someone could take something valuable from this. And it's just interesting. Like, I'm really interested to hear like what the difference in experiences and vibe between Everest and K2. And you can speak on the mountain itself. Like, what are the mountains like? What
Yeah.
are they like? What are their personalities like?
Yeah.
And then the actual experience, like, what were they like the differences?
Yes. Very, very different. And I like that you mentioned the personality of a mountain because I feel like mountains have personalities and maybe that's just a part of me getting to know them or studying them. But Everest to me feels very accessible. And I know that sounds crazy because it's the highest mountain in the world, but it just feels still very welcome. Like
Mm.
that mountain is open to people climbing it.
Sure.
And the Nepalese, they, believe mountains have genders and they believe there are gods that live on some mountains.
Mhm.
And so the Everest in that culture is a woman. And she felt like she was open to be climbed, very welcoming. Whereas K2 to me felt like austere and hard and, you know, very guarded, like that mountain didn't want us there. And that was a very hard thing for me to resolve because I try to be very connected with nature and try to listen to things that I see and hear and feel in nature. And so to climb a mountain that I felt like didn't want me there was very difficult.
Sure.
And I spent a lot of time just thanking that mountain for letting me be there to like try to make friends with it.
Yeah,
Like, I'm
yeah,
not going to
totally.
disrespect you.
Hmm
I feel like I'm capable of being here. I've studied, like, just trying to show as much respect to that mountain as I could.
Yeah.
Um, because I think to me, climbing is about being like in partnership with the mountain and with nature. It's not about me conquering anything.
For
It's
sure.
about working together and hopefully things turn out okay.
Yeah.
And so those mountains feel very different to me. in terms of the vibe and like what it's like to be there, Everest, for right or wrong, this is another deeper conversation, but it's become a very big enterprise to climb
Yeah.
Mount Everest.
Yeah.
And there's two routes you can climb, either from the Tibetan side, the north side, or from the Nepalese side, which is the south side. And it's much easier to get a permit to climb the Nepalese side of the mountain. So that's where probably 90% of the people climb. And when you get to base camp, you've walked for close to a week. You arrive there at 17,500 feet. And it looks like a little tent city.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
people there from all over the world. There is Wi-Fi. There are helicopters flying in and out. There is a tent that's set up as an emergency room. There, things are getting more and more extravagant in terms of the tents and the resources and amenities that are there for
Sure.
people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also very jovial, I would say. So
Okay.
there's people who, they're Sherpas who see their other Sherpa friends once a
Yeah.
year when they're climbing there. And there's
Mm-hmm.
guides, the same thing. They see these people once a year when they're there. So it's very like homey feeling, and it feels like a sense of community.
Yeah.
Whereas on K2, there are maybe there are 100 people at base camp.
Yeah.
And it's much smaller. Those amenities don't exist.
Right. There's no helicopters or, nothing like that.
If you need a helicopter ride, you have to negotiate it with the Nepalese army,
Yeah.
or sorry, the Pakistani army.
Mm-hmm.
Those things just don't exist. And it
Yeah.
felt to me much more serious. Like everyone who was
Absolutely.
there had really earned the right to be there and had prepared. Many of the members of my team this was their third attempt to summit.
Mm.
So it just feels a lot more serious and difficult, I think. Everything feels a lot harder too.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the vibe that I get, from your book and just other books is, Everest is a lot more accessible in the way of like, there's a lot of people there, there's amenities, whereas K2 in my mind, I see it as this kind of dark, kind of like really scary place that's just completely inhospitable,
That's a very good way to describe it. And there also at K2 base camp, there's a memorial kind of across from the main base camp. And maybe it's not every, but a lot of people that have died on that mountain have some sort of memorial there. Often it's a tin plate, which was the first person who died there. His Pakistani team hammered his name into a tin plate.
Got it.
And so we now call that space the Gilkey Memorial. And so it's very sobering to walk by
For
that
sure.
and to think, all of those people are doing exactly what I'm doing. They all walked onto this mountain thinking they were ready, with hopes, with preparation, with their family's support. And for whatever reason, they didn't make it. And so I think that's part of what keeps the vibe at K2 base camp a little more serious.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's what, for every 4 people who attempt K2, 1 will die.
Right. Right.
Like, just let that sink in. For every 4, 1 will die. Like,
Yeah.
that's incredible. And also, you were what, the second American woman to summit
Second
K2?
American woman to summit that peak. Yeah.
And you're on the podcast. I can't believe it. Seriously, someone pinch me. How, like, and I know you thought about the people that died a lot, didn't you? You had a list of like the people that died and how they died. Like,
Yep.
how did you, I don't know, like work with that? I don't know if you'd call it fear. Like, how did you work with that fear to be able to just have the courage to try?
I think the first thing that I had to do was to accept that my death could be an outcome of that climb.
Yeah.
And that it was a very real possibility. And I'm not saying that was smart or right, but that was my process, decision
Yeah,
making.
you kind of
That was my
had to,
decision-making
right?
process. Right. I think you're being a bit disrespectful, and I think you're not being honest if you
Yeah.
don't recognize that that could happen.
Right.
And if the people around you don't know that, right? Like, it's not fair. I'm not
Yeah,
married, but it wouldn't have been fair for me to say to a partner, it's going to be fine. I'll be back in 2 months. Like, I
for
think everyone
sure.
around you that loves and supports you needs to know
The
that that's a
risks and
possibility too.
yeah.
Um, so I think that was the first thing that I did. And then you mentioned the list. So I'm a very logical person, as we've established. And so knowing where people had died on the mountain, where physically on the mountain they had perished, and how they had died also helped me to just put things in perspective and understand where the riskiest places were so that I could then understand and respect that and have a plan for how I was going to climb in those areas. And that helped me a lot as well.
That makes sense. It's like a very, what's the word? I guess just logical way of like preparing yourself to train and being like, here's all the spots and here's what I can do in those spots and how I can navigate those spots.
Right.
But yeah, I think I think it's incredible that you're able to do that without letting the fear kind of overtake you and be like, no, this is too scary. Like, I can't do this.
Yep.
And I think it shows like how you're able to not get rid of the fear, because the fear is also necessary to keep you
Yes.
safe.
Yes.
Right. But also it's like you have to have this balance, or else the fear can either overtake you or you can be too nonchalant on the mountain. Right.
Yeah. I call it making friends with fear,
Yeah.
because you're exactly right. And I think it's true whether you're climbing or you're, trying out for the basketball team, right?
Right.
You have to, a little bit of fear can keep us focused. It can keep us grounded in reality, and it can keep us from being complacent. But too much fear can be just stifling and can prevent us from moving forward.
Yeah, like speaking of making friends with fear, the word flow came to my mind. When you were climbing, did you experience flow like a lot? Was it hit and miss? Like, and when I mean flow for you guys listening, it's kind of like in the zone feeling, right? When you're
Yeah.
playing your sport and or it doesn't even have to be a sport, but where you're just really present, with
Yes.
everything. Like, did you experience that a lot? And was it on purpose when you experienced flow, or did it kind of just happen for you?
Yeah, it's funny because I've been studying flow as it
Mm,
relates to performance, and those are the times when we perform our best, when we're in
yeah.
those flow states and we're able to accomplish things that seem daunting. And like sometimes it happens to me when I'm organizing my garage, right?
Yeah,
Like it's
totally.
it can happen.
Yeah. You're just
You're just like churning through it. So it definitely has happened to me on the mountain. Normally when it happens, I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to mess this up. Like, oh,
don't
I
let it.
think,
Yeah, you want it
yeah,
to stay there.
right. Um, but it's interesting. What I've learned is that we actually need some sort of struggle to get into that flow state. So there has to be some sort of difficulty that we experience first in order to push us there.
Yeah.
And so I love it when it happens, and I'm not yet practiced enough to be able to like set myself up to know it's going to happen 100% of the time when I want it to. But it's kind of like meditating. It's when you're
Yeah.
there, you're like, oh my God, I think I'm doing it. I think it's happening.
You're like, stay.
Yeah, don't touch anything.
Don't. Yeah, and I would imagine too that I don't want to say always, but that it probably comes most of the time when you have release control and you're not in your
Yeah.
head. You're kind of just like doing the thing. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's totally true. Yeah, we're just like focused and confident, and things just seem to click into place. And what I notice is that things don't seem hard anymore. Things seem to just, to use the word flow, like I'm able to just move my body in a way that feels very efficient, and things just feel like they've clicked into place, and it feels really good.
So I have a couple like more quick, like I
Yeah,
don't want to call them rapid fire, and then I want to talk about Alpine athletics a little bit.
cool.
But what is like the most, I guess, two part? What's the most difficult part of mountaineering, and what is the most enjoyable part? Is it enjoyable? Like, yeah. So what do
Yeah.
you like most, and I guess what's the hardest part?
I think that the most difficult part is probably the preparation. I love the preparation,
Yeah.
but there's times when I'm like, oh, I gotta go run again, and it's raining and it's 5 in the morning, and like, oh, can I just, it would be so much nicer just to stay in bed. So
Yeah,
that's difficult. And I tell myself it either gets to be hard now or it gets to be hard on the mountain.
for
And
sure.
I get to choose. And obviously, the best choice is to do the run and to get through the difficulty now because that sets you up for things to be easier on the mountain.
Yeah.
So I love preparation. It's what I built my company around, but it's still challenging for a lot of
Yeah.
people. And the most rewarding thing now for me, so in the past 2 years, I've organized all women's climbs. And we, to the extent that we can, there's not a lot of female guides around the world, but we hire female guides, we hire female porters, and then we raise money for some women's supportive organization in the country that we're climbing in. And so those moments now, I will tell you, Shay, are just seeing, especially the women who are like in Nepal, for example, who are our porters or who are the Sherpa who help us at base camp,
Mhm.
seeing the impact that those climbs have on them and their skills and the jobs that they are able to get as a result of being on those teams is the best, most rewarding, satisfying feeling I've ever had. So I love that. And on these climbs, they're, often women who haven't climbed a lot, depending on what the goal is. So, for example, I do all women's climbs on Mount Baker in Washington State every summer. And that's a like beginner climb for women who are like, you've been hiking a lot, you like being outside, you want to see what it's like to be on a glacier. And seeing those women scared in the beginning, uncertain, not sure how it's going to go, and then stand on the top of a 10,000-foot tall mountain and the sense of pride and accomplishment and confidence that I
Mhm.
see in those women and knowing that that will trickle down into other parts of their life, that for me is the funnest part.
Man, that's awesome. It's not, it's not your own joy of the summit or anything like that. It's the community and the people you help and just seeing other
Yes.
people like have those transformations.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
really special.
that's awesome.
Definitely.
So I would love to hear like what is you talked about the mountain has taught you so much. There's so many lessons. If you could distill maybe the top, I don't know, you could probably say like a million lessons that you've learned, but what's one of the most impactful lessons that the mountains have taught you?
Yeah. So the short answer is learning to use my voice. And
Interesting.
I wasn't raised in a way where I was encouraged to speak up. And that, is how I became an adult, right? Just seeing like sort of sitting back, not raising my hand if I needed something, not wanting to trouble anybody. And when I started climbing, that's that's how I showed up because I didn't know any other way. And then I realized that if you don't stand up and say what's right for you or what you're uncomfortable with, that in the mountains you can get into dangerous situations. And so that became very obvious to me when I was on Everest and the team was pushing harder than I was comfortable pushing. We were actually descending and there was a little bit of a storm rolling in, and I was slower than the guys on my team. And they were pushing me to go faster. And I remember thinking, like, no, like I'm going to go at the pace that's comfortable for me
Yeah.
because that's what I need to do to stay safe. And it wasn't like I was like a minute behind them. It was not like this big gap in difference,
Right.
but they were anxious to get down. And I remember that was the first
Yeah.
time I think that I'd stood up for myself and said, no, like this is what I'm doing and I'm doing this for me
Yeah.
because this is what I need to do to be safe. And it's still hard for me in my real life, but I know that help that staying true to who I am and authentic and being transparent about that is the most freeing way to go through life.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we could have had a completely different conversation just on that piece and like
Yes.
being, for the most part, the only woman. I know there was others with you, but yeah, and I know we didn't get there, but maybe you'll come on again and we can dive into more of that stuff.
Totally.
But I said that was going to be my last one, but I really want to know, what does it feel like to be on the highest point of the earth? What does that feel like? I have to know.
Yeah. So I wish I could tell you that it was this magical, euphoric moment and
Mm.
that everything in the world became crystal clear to me.
Oh, the angels are
Yeah.
singing.
Right. It was not like that.
Was it? Yeah.
It, I'm a very pragmatic person. And so when I got to the summit of Everest, I had this checklist in my brain of what I wanted to do there. And most of it was very practical. Like I wanted to get a fresh bottle of oxygen.
Yep.
I wanted to check my gear to make sure it was ready to go down the mountain because I'd just been going up the mountain for days. And I wanted to just have a moment of quiet with the mountain and to share some gratitude to the mountain and to everyone that had helped me accomplish that goal.
Mhm.
And so for me, it just felt like I'm here. like, like
Thank God.
it didn't, there wasn't this like euphoric thing that happened. It felt sort
Mm.
of like, okay, I'm going to do these three things and I'm going to just sit here for a minute and then you have to go down
Well, that's the
because
thing. Yeah, you're not done yet. Like you still have to go
no,
down, which I mean, would you say that it's as dangerous going down or not
it's actually
quite
more
more?
dangerous.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Which is because we're tired. So, when we
for
started
sure.
descending Everest, we'd probably been climbing already for 9 or 10 hours.
Yeah.
And you also, gravity is not as much in your favor because you're facing away from the mountain. You're
Yeah.
much more likely to make a mistake because of being tired. And so most accidents that happen on the descent.
So, yeah. Yeah. So you still got to be like locked in. You can't just,
Yeah.
crash and,
Yep.
slide down the mountain later,
No,
unfortunately.
the summit is halfway.
No
Yeah.
gondolas.
No gondolas.
Okay, so I'd love to hear a little bit more about Alpine Athletics, which is your coaching company, correct?
Yeah.
So yeah, tell us about that. Like, your thing that you were talking about with Mount Baker, I may reach out to you about
Please
that.
do.
But I'm
Yes.
sure there's some other people listening. But I just want to know, yeah, tell us about Alpine Athletics, kind of what it's all about, and anything else you want to share about it.
Yeah. So I started Alpine Athletics when I was at K2 Base Camp actually in 2018.
Mhm.
There's a lot of downtime in climbing. And so
Yeah.
I got a notebook and I wrote out the content for a website. And I had been coached by mountaineering coaches in preparation for those climbs and sort of different story about how that fell apart for me. But I knew that I was passionate about preparing for climbing. I knew that I seemed to prepare differently than everyone else around me, that I did
Mhm.
it in a more holistic way where it wasn't just being physically prepared, it was being mentally prepared. It was really studying the mountain and making sure your gear was really dialed in. And
Mhm.
so I decided that I would start my own company, which is what Alpine Athletics is all about. It's about making sure that climbers are prepared mentally, physically, and tactically for whatever their goal is. And we work with mountain athletes from all over the world who are maybe on their first alpine climb or their first rock climb, or maybe they're climbing Mount Everest.
Yeah.
So, whatever your skill level is, and my team is very happy to help you get ready. We do everything remotely, which is really cool because that means we get to help people from all over the world. And it's one of the most rewarding things that I have in my life because I get to talk about mountains all day, every day.
Yeah. It's so cool.
And I get to help other people get ready. And that, through that process, everything we do is very personalized. We really get to know people and what motivates them and create training packages for them to help them get ready and then watch them achieve their goals. So it's like the
That's
coolest thing
beautiful.
ever.
That's
And
so
then
cool.
more recently I don't guide, but I will coordinate or collaborate with a guide company to organize an all women's climb somewhere in the world. So we do 2 climbs on Mount Baker in Washington State every summer. We're getting ready to go to Mexico to climb 2 volcanoes there in February.
Very cool.
And then I actually will put an Instagram post out next week to get ideas about where other women want to climb. But we've gone to Ecuador and Nepal, and we'll probably go to Tanzania next year. So it's just super fun.
Man, that's so, like all the travel too. Like it's such a cool thing. And yeah, I just want, because I know you talked, I think, a little bit about Alpine Athletics in the book towards the end. But when I was reading that, I was like, that sounds like the coolest thing ever. Like, you're just going to talk about mountains all day. And like, that's so awesome. Yeah.
It's super fun. And I get to research them for clients and, help them understand what's concerning, and then work through that. We focus a lot on mindset too. So
for sure.
It's a dream for me for sure.
Yeah. And you have a podcast called Finding Elevation as well, right?
Yep. And the podcast is all about sharing tips and information and hacks and training advice to people who want to pursue and be their best selves in the mountains. So it's really a fun way to share what I've learned and to invite other people, other experts and clients. Like I also love having athletes on to talk about their experience because that's helpful to other people. So it's just another way for me to be helpful and to add to the mountaineering community.
Beautiful. So for those of you guys listening, and if you're on YouTube, I'm holding up the book, Finding Elevation. My camera's going to move with me there. So Lisa, where is the best place to get Finding Elevation? Is there a best place to get it or just wherever, Amazon, all that?
You can get it anywhere. Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can order it directly from my website too, which is called Lisa Climbs. Either of those work. I get a little more of the money when it's ordered directly.
Get it on the website.
Yeah. But anything is fine. And I love reviews too. So I'd love you to drop me a note on Amazon and let me know what you think. I read all of them and it's really been a fun process to put my story out there.
Yeah. Like I said, this has been one of my favorite all-time books. And I actually, when I went to my local bookstore, I told her about you and books. I'm hoping that they're gonna stock your book too.
I would love that.
Yeah. But make sure you guys go check it out, whether I would say even a teenage girl, like this book it's just there's so much to it. It's so in depth, just like this conversation. So go check out the book. And then where can people, so lisaclimbs.com is your website. And then what's your Instagram handle again?
It's also Lisa Climbs.
There we go. Nice and simple.
Easy.
Lisa Climbs. Cool. Well, thanks again for coming on, Lisa. It's a dream come true for me to be able to talk to you.
It's my pleasure.
I really appreciate it. And I hope that everyone will grab the book and let us know how you guys like it. Thanks again, Lisa.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.